Okay, guys, we're gonna try. Miss Denny's having some technical difficulties. We'll see if this works. Ooh.
Hey guys, it's me, Miss Denny. I just wanted to say what's up. Hope you're doing well in day 3 of school closure. I know you've been doing a lot of reading. I appreciate all of your hard work during this time, and it looks like you guys really understood the context for the United States leading up to World War II. Now we're going to be looking at less of the war itself and more about what was happening on the home front, or in other words, in American soil during the time shortly after the bombing of Pearl Harbor and the U.S. entering the war. And our essential question this week is going to be about looking into were American fears about Japanese threat within the United States justified? Why or why not? So we're going to be exploring that a bit today. You need some background knowledge on what this situation was, Japanese internment in the U.S. So to get started, let's look. How long had Japanese people been living in the U.S. before World War II? Over 250 immigrants from Japan came to the U.S. between 1816 to 1923. So a significant amount of people had already established themselves in the United States. There were many different generations to come after this initial group of immigrants who would then become American citizens. This migration would stop in 1924 when there was an Immigration Act that outlawed almost all Japanese immigration. Most people from Japan who lived in the United States were on the West Coast, mostly California and Hawaii. And as you can see, by 1940, in the midst of World War II, over 125,000 people of Japanese origin lived in the U.S. By the time the war had started, only 0.28% of the population was of Japanese descent. So very small minority. So keep that number, 0.28%, when we're thinking of that word scapegoat when we're learning about this thing called Japanese internment. Leading up to World War II, as you already know, there was a rise in dictators. You can see the definition again. A dictator is a government or social situation where one person makes all the rules. The dictator's motives, or the reasons that they wanted all the power, was driven by nationalism to prove that their country is the best. They would choose to prove their power through their strong military, and they would use that military to take over nearby territories. In Europe, the Nazis did this by taking over the continent, as you saw on the map yesterday. Japan, they invaded China, they invaded Korea, and other nearby countries, including Indonesia. And their ruler, Hideki Tojo, I think. I forget his name exactly. His next closest territory, maybe not out west of him, but east of him, is the United States. So the United States was vulnerable to Japanese territorial expansion. We also had Hitler, Mussolini, and Stalin in the Soviet Union, which you already know about. A review from yesterday. Also, there were two sides. At first, we had Japan, Germany, Italy, and Soviet Union was on the Axis powers until Germany decided to break their treaty and try to invade the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union switched over to the Allies side. The United States is not on here because they do not join the war till after December 7th, 1941, when Pearl Harbor was bombed by the Japanese. World War II started in 1939, why did the U.S. not join the fight to stop Hitler and other dictators until 1941? Well, as you already know, there were two sides to this American foreign policy, which was the isolationist and the interventionist, and most of America was isolationist. Most did not want to join the war. They did not see the war as relevant to them. They did not want to risk their lives, whereas the interventionists saw that this war was a threat to mankind and might have felt sympathetic for people suffering in Europe, including civilians and the Jewish people who were being mass murdered at this time. Pearl Harbor is when the U.S. ends their isolationist policy, and even the isolationists say, well, now that someone's attacked us, we're ready to join the war. You can see here that from Tokyo to Hawaii, where Pearl Harbor was, it's pretty far away, but the closest territory between Japan and North America, showing how if Japan maybe wanted to take over Hawaii, how much closer they would be to our west coast and could potentially invade. Review from yesterday also. This was on December 7th. It was the first attack on U.S. soil. 2,403 people were killed. All of these people were injured and ships were damaged. Over 300 planes damaged or destroyed. This was a major event because it started a huge paranoia and racist targeting Japanese people in the United States. As you can see from these posters, these are American propaganda posters. So propaganda is when you use images to push a political message. So these propaganda posters show Japanese people as very dehumanized. They don't look like real people. They look like evil characters, like monsters. Take a look at some of the details right now of this. You can see that in the poster to the left, that the Japanese person has a Nazi flag on their pants, and they're listening through a door. So the idea, in both of these, they're listening through a door. The idea was that white Americans and maybe non-Japanese Americans feared that the Japanese people within our population were Japanese spies, and that they would be the enemy since the Japanese were the ones who bombed the U.S. This was not founded in any real evidence. This was just made up purely out of fear, and it was just used to stir up a lot of fear in the United States. There is no proven fact from the FBI or CIA. Many years after the war, people have looked back and there's been no proof that there are any major threats of Japanese spies within the Japanese American population in the U.S. There was all sorts of messaging that showed prejudice, ostracism, which means pointing someone out, excluding them, and dehumanization of Japanese people in the media. Okay, here's a Dr. Seuss comic. You can see that these Japanese people are lined up all on the West Coast, going from California to Oregon, all the way to Washington, and this is a Japanese person handing out, like bombs to this line of Japanese people. So this is Dr. Seuss being a little bit racist, definitely, in this photo, suggesting that Japanese people were the threat, and that they were going to bomb us. And that was a little bit, looking back, a little bit ironic, since he fought really hard against prejudice towards Europeans, especially like the Jews that were being killed during the Holocaust, but then he was using a similar racism to ostracize the Japanese people. He later apologized for this cartoon depiction. Another propaganda making a Japanese person look like a monster. He's going to kill a white woman. Some people just blatantly exclusionary and racist, generalizing all Japanese people as a problem. And then even these little protesters down with, okay, and when you see this word Japs, guys, I'm just going to say it really that one time. It's not a good word to say. It's a derogatory way of referring to Japanese people. So when you respond to an essay or something, or a prompt, don't refer to Japanese people as Japs, okay? That's not good. But the interesting thing about this last photo, that one, is that the Jews were often called and compared to rats in Nazi Germany before the Holocaust. And what happened in the Holocaust was that Jews were sent to these concentration camps. And the similar thing happened here, and it's not remembered as the Holocaust because people weren't killed necessarily, but the Japanese people were sent to these very horrible camps that were concentration camps and forced to do hard labor. And they were forced to do this through Order 9066. So an executive order is when the president makes a law that everyone has to obey. He doesn't usually use this power very often, and he has to have approval from Congress, but this one went through, and this executive order instructed that all Japanese people, or resident alien enemies, so once again, not using that direct language, but we all know that means Japanese people, to be sent to designated military areas, aka concentration. You can see where these concentration camps were put. So Japanese internment refers to Japanese American and Japanese people being put into concentration camps. Internment is putting a person in prison or other kind of detention, generally in wartime. So this is what it looked like. Sometimes it was really cold. You can see in that top photo there's snow. And you can see in the bottom photo how these barracks, that's their housing situation, how they look. Really thin walls. People got really sick here. There were horrible living conditions. There was gross bathrooms. And also the men were forced to make these themselves. So just a very dehumanizing process, all because there was this racist fear that was powerful enough to convince Americans that this was a normal decision to make. Okay. These concentration camps, this internment was very dehumanizing. As you can see, there's little boys who are behind a fence, okay? That's not how humans are supposed to look, right? To refer back to our word last semester, dehumanization is to treat someone as though they're not a human being. These little boys are being treated like animals. They're behind this barbed wire fence. And then you're wondering maybe what's that picture of the arm to the left? Well, that is a tattoo that a Jewish person in a similar concentration camp was given to be marked instead of referred to by their name. And although once again, Jewish concentration camps and Japanese concentration camps were not super similar. The idea behind both of them is to dehumanize a group of people and control them and put them into one place and treat them very poorly. Okay, here's one person's account. She says, "We have no one to go to for help, not even a church. Anything goes now that President Roosevelt signed the order to get rid of us. How can he do this to his own citizens? No lawyer has the courage to defend us. Caucasian friends stay away from fear of being labeled, quote, Jap lovers. There's not a more lonely feeling than to be banished by my own country. There's no place to go." So that's by Kiyo Sato. She is a Japanese American woman who's telling about how scared she is before her family was sent to the concentration camp. This last slide I'll post also onto Schoology so that you can watch this video and answer these questions. How were Japanese Americans dehumanized in this video? And what were 3 consequences of internment? Using evidence from the video. Okay, so take a look at the video. It's pretty interesting. It's a primary source. They're showing lots of video from someone who was able to sneak in a camera into these concentration camps. We're going to continue to look at this topic this week, looking at firsthand accounts of life in the concentration camps, because it is a part of our history that we definitely don't want to repeat, although some might argue that certain parts of the situation are being repeated today. For example, in these concentration camps, a lot of families were separated from each other. So currently we have some detention centers where immigrants are held and people are being separated, families are being separated from each other. So although, once again, not the same situation, both have the same psychological effect on the people who experience this. So it's something to think about, and it's both the responsibility of our government. So we need to think about what ways we can learn from this, what ways we can apply language from this time period to our current time period, so that we can move towards a better, healthier society. But hopefully you'll come to that conclusion, or whatever conclusion you come to, a different one perhaps by the end of this unit. Okay, so last thing, take a look at this slide on Schoology, answer these questions, watch this video, and have a great rest of your day. Bye.